The message that shouldn't exist. Warsaw, Poland, December 20th, 1932. Snow fell in thin, wind-driven sheets across the courtyard of the Polish Cipher Bureau. Inside, the air smelled of burnt tobacco, ink, and sweat. Rows of desks overflowed with cables and cipher sheets, each filled with German messages, radio chatter intercepted, translated, and rewritten in the mysterious machine code of a new device the Wehrmacht called Enigma. At the far end of the room sat Marian Rejewski, a 27-year-old mathematician with the calm intensity of someone who preferred puzzles to people. He wasn't a spy in the cinematic sense. No trench coat, no pistol, no whispered codes in alleys. His weapon was logic, his battlefield a desk piled with symbols that made no sense to anyone else. But tonight, something was different. A courier from Poznan had arrived with an intercepted German transmission. Routine. But when Rejewski placed it beside a similar message from 2 weeks earlier, his eyes narrowed. The pattern, the faint symmetry of letters betrayed something human. Somewhere inside that string of nonsense, he felt rhythm, repetition, the echo of a flawed habit. "Same operator," he murmured in Polish. His pencil danced across the paper, marking frequencies and probable pairings. Then he stopped. The Germans had changed their procedure again. Enigma was supposed to be invincible, a machine that rewired its code with each keystroke, creating 150 quintillion possible combinations. Even if Poland had the resources of an empire, no human mind could solve it by brute force. But Rejewski wasn't trying to brute force anything. He was trying to understand it. Across the table, his colleague Georgy Rujewski looked up from a mess of code sheets. "Another dead end?" "Not dead," Sably Rejewski said. "Just buried deeper." He reached for the chalkboard, sketching the Enigma's rotors from memory. 3 interlocking wheels, each with 26 letters, constantly shifting with each press. Every day, the Germans changed the settings, rotor order, ring positions, plugboard connections. To anyone else, it was chaos. To Rejewski, it was mathematics with a pulse. Weeks turned to months. The Cipher Bureau's mathematicians worked in silence while Europe edged closer to war. They listened to Germany's radio waves like doctors feeling a patient's heartbeat. Faster, louder, more dangerous. But then came a twist of fortune, the kind that happens once in history. Through an anonymous source in German industry, later believed to be an employee at Enigma's manufacturer, Polish intelligence obtained the wiring diagram for the Enigma's internal rotors. It wasn't the key, but it was a map. With that, Rejewski's pencil came alive. He used pure algebra, the science of structure, to reverse engineer the wiring logic. By 1938, he and his team had built a working replica of Enigma in Warsaw, one indistinguishable from the German original. They called it the Bomba Cryptologica, the cryptologic bomb. For the first time, a human mind could outthink a machine. But there was a problem. The Germans weren't standing still. Their system grew more complex. New plugboard cables, additional rotors, new patterns. Every time the Poles caught up, the code slipped further away. And with war clouds thickening, they knew time was running out. Rejewski stood at the window one night, watching Warsaw flicker under blackout drills. He said, "They think their words are invisible, but we're already reading them. We just don't know the language yet." He didn't know it then, but within months, that quiet confidence would ignite one of the most extraordinary alliances in espionage history, one that would stretch from Warsaw to Paris to London and end up saving millions. The man who would steal Hitler's war machine secrets was already in the room. He just hadn't crossed the border yet. The Gift to the West. July 24th, 1939, Pyry Forest, near Warsaw. The summer air was thick with pine resin and nerves. 3 black cars wound their way through the forest, engines purring softly beneath the canopy. Inside were representatives from 2 nations that did not trust each other, Britain and France, brought together by a single secret the Poles were about to share. In a clearing ahead, the Polish Cipher Bureau had built a makeshift meeting tent. Inside, under a single hanging lamp, stood Marian Rejewski and his 2 colleagues, Jerzy Ruzicki and Henryk Zygalski, beside a table covered with cloth. Beneath that cloth lay something the Western Allies believed to be impossible: a fully functional Enigma machine, built not in Berlin, but in Warsaw. The British delegation, led by Commander Alistair Denniston from the Government Code and Cipher School, entered first. He was a careful man, skeptical by habit. To him, the Enigma was an abstract monster, a cipher too advanced to break without divine intervention. The French followed, led by Gustave Bertrand, a spy master who had long supported the Polish codebreakers, but had never seen their full work. Rejewski greeted them in formal French. "Gentlemen," he said, "you have come a long way. We thought it was time you saw what we have been reading." He drew back the cloth. The British officers froze. Before them sat the familiar black box they had only seen in captured photos, the Enigma machine, with its 3 rotors, plugboard, and tiny glass lamps. But this one wasn't German. Its brass shone too bright. Its screws were too new. Rejewski's assistant switched it on. The lamps glowed amber. Denniston blinked. "You've built one." Rejewski nodded. "We built 6. The next hour changed the war before the war had even begun. As Rejewski explained their mathematical approach, Denniston took furious notes. The Poles had achieved what the British had deemed theoretically impossible. They had cracked Enigma 2 years before the war started. They demonstrated it by typing in a German phrase intercepted days earlier. The machine flickered, decrypted it in seconds, and out came plain German text, an army logistics message from the Wehrmacht's Southern Command. The British delegates exchanged looks of disbelief. Bertrand was speechless. Rejewski gestured to another object on the table, a small, mechanical box of gears and rotors. "This," he said, "we call the bomba. It imitates Enigma's thinking, but faster. It tests possibilities until it finds the key." The visitors leaned closer. To the untrained eye, it was a tangle of gears. To Denniston, it was the future of intelligence, a weapon that didn't kill, but revealed. After the demonstration, Bertrand asked the question on everyone's mind: "Why share this now?" Rejewski's answer was simple: "Because we may not have a country soon." The tent fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, or maybe artillery from training grounds along the German border. The Poles had lived under that shadow for years. They knew war wasn't coming. It was already here, just waiting for permission to begin. Rejewski walked around the table, resting his hand on the Enigma machine.
If Germany invades, our work will be destroyed. We would rather it live on in your hands than die in ours." The French and British officers nodded gravely. The significance of what had been given to them, a working replica of Germany's most secret machine, was staggering. The Poles had done it in secret, with limited resources, what the great powers of Europe could not. By nightfall, the British cars were gone, carrying with them two complete Polish-built Enigma replicas, rotor blueprints, and Zygalski sheets, hand-perforated grids that could narrow down daily key settings. In London, the equipment would be delivered to Bletchley Park, the country estate already being quietly prepared as a wartime intelligence center. Rejewski and his team returned to Warsaw in silence. They didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no speeches. They simply turned off the lights and continued listening to German radio traffic. A month later, on September 1st, 1939, German bombers appeared over Warsaw. The Cipher Bureau evacuated within days. The codebreakers, who had handed the Allies the key to victory, scattered across Europe, hunted by the very enemy they had helped expose. But their secret, the stolen heart of Hitler's war machine, was safe. And somewhere, in a quiet English manner, a new generation of codebreakers was waiting to make use of it.
The Silent War at Bletchley Park. England, autumn 1940. Rain lashed against the windows of the old Victorian mansion. The gravel driveway was slick with mud, and the clipped hedges outside swayed under the wind's howl. Inside, the rooms were alive with noise, the clicking of typewriters, the hum of electric motors, the staccato rhythm of logic machines testing code after code. This was Station X, the beating heart of Britain's secret war, a place where mathematicians, linguists, and chess champions worked side by side to read the enemy's mail. The work was relentless, the stakes absolute. At its center sat a quiet, eccentric man with tired eyes and a mind like lightning, Alan Turing. Turing had studied mathematics at Cambridge, obsessed with abstract logic and the boundaries of computation. But now, surrounded by the debris of war, cigarette smoke, teacups, and reams of intercepted German messages, he had one goal: to finish what the Poles had begun. On his desk lay the Polish blueprints, the Enigma replica, Zygalski sheets, and Rejewski's meticulous notes on rotor wiring. Every letter, every circuit was a breadcrumb left by the men who'd risked their lives to get it here. Without those blueprints, Turing's task would have been impossible. But he was about to turn their foundation into something extraordinary. The problem was time. Enigma's settings changed daily at midnight, and each new configuration created billions of possible rotor alignments. Human hands couldn't solve it fast enough, not with paper and logic alone. Turing's solution was a machine. He called it the bomb, a tribute to the Polish bomba cryptologica that had inspired it. The British version would be faster, larger, and powered by electricity, an engine of thought that could race through permutations in minutes instead of weeks. When the first prototype arrived at Bletchley Park in March 1940, it filled an entire room. Rows of rotating drums clicked in hypnotic patterns, their mechanical rhythm like the pulse of some living creature. The staff gathered as engineers powered it on. Lights blinked, motors spun, and for the first time, the British had a machine that could think, not with intuition, but with persistence. Each successful run meant lives saved.
The messages the bomb deciphered revealed U-boat positions, convoy ambushes, and Luftwaffe strike plans. Entire Allied fleets were rerouted based on words that had once been German secrets. Yet the irony remained. The foundation of it all came from three Polish mathematicians working in a cramped Warsaw office years earlier. They had handed Britain a weapon, and Britain had turned it into a miracle. Turing knew this. In one letter to a colleague, he wrote quietly, "The Poles deserve more credit than history will ever give them." The British added new innovations, electrical fault detectors, logical shortcuts, and a team of brilliant women known as the Wrens, who operated the machines day and night. Soon, Bletchley was cracking Enigma faster than Germany could change its settings. But the Germans didn't know. They trusted Enigma implicitly. Their faith in its perfection was their weakness. And so, the silent war continued. Every time a U-boat commander sent his morning weather report, Bletchley read it. Every Luftwaffe flight plan, every coded naval directive, intercepted, decrypted, understood. The information was filtered up the chain to Churchill himself, who called Bletchley's work "the geese that laid the golden eggs." But secrecy was paramount. Even Allied admirals receiving the decrypted orders never knew where the intelligence came from. The myth of luck, good guesses, and chance interceptions hid the reality that Britain was reading the Reich's mind in real time. One day, a message came through marked urgent, a German transmission coordinating U-boat packs in the North Atlantic. Within hours, British destroyers intercepted and destroyed them. The cost to Germany was catastrophic. The Kriegsmarine couldn't understand how their unbreakable code had been compromised. Inside Bletchley, no one cheered. They simply logged the next transmission and kept working. For them, the war never stopped. It just shifted forms, from bombs to ciphers, from smoke to silence. Outside, London burned under the Blitz. Inside, Turing's machines clicked on, line after line, decoding not just messages, but victory itself. Yet few would ever know that the spark for this miracle of intelligence didn't begin here in England. It began years earlier, in the minds of three Polish mathematicians who had fought their own war with pencil, paper, and courage. They had handed Britain a weapon, and Britain had turned it into a miracle.
June 6, 1944. The English Channel. Dark waters stretched to the horizon, glinting faintly under the pre-dawn sky. Thousands of ships moved in perfect silence, destroyers, landing craft, transports, and troop ships, a floating army bound for France. Operation Overlord was underway. Every man aboard that armada knew this was the decisive moment of the war, but few knew that their survival depended on a secret battle already fought, not on the beaches, but in the quiet halls of Bletchley Park. Days earlier, a decoded Enigma transmission had revealed that the Germans had been deceived. They believed the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The deception, Operation Fortitude, had worked perfectly. And Bletchley's constant flow of intelligence confirmed that Hitler had refused to move his Panzer Reserve south, convinced the real attack was still to come. The invasion fleet steamed ahead, and history turned on the hum of a code-breaking machine. Back at Bletchley Park, rows of bombs thundered in unison, their mechanical hearts beating like drums of war. The operators, young women barely in their 20s, hunched over typewriters, noting down decrypts as they came through. Each message was a fragment of a massive puzzle.
Enemy positions, troop movements, supply shortages, coded pleas from commanders who didn't know they were already beaten. The intelligence streamed to Allied command. When Field Marshal Rommel requested permission to reinforce Normandy, his message was decrypted within hours. The Allies already knew where his tanks were, and more importantly, where they weren't. The D-Day landing succeeded not just because of bravery, but because the Allies were reading Hitler's playbook in real time. Every counterattack, every shift in defense was anticipated because of a secret born in Warsaw years before. By 1945, as Allied armies closed in on Berlin, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park were reading nearly 90% of Germany's high-level military traffic. The Enigma, once a symbol of Nazi precision, had become an open book. The U-boats were defeated. Luftwaffe plans were anticipated, and Hitler's orders arrived on Churchill's desk before they reached German field headquarters. And yet, none of this could be spoken of. The work at Bletchley Park remained classified for decades. The Polish mathematicians who had first unlocked Enigma's logic, Rejewski, Różycki, and Zygalski, never received full recognition in their lifetimes. Różycki died in 1942 when his ship was sunk in the Mediterranean. Rejewski and Zygalski survived the war in exile, their contributions buried under the weight of secrecy. In 1974, when Britain finally declassified the Ultra program, historians pieced together the full story, and at its foundation were 3 Polish names and a single act of defiance, sharing the stolen blueprints of Hitler's most powerful weapon before it was too late. April 1945, Warsaw. The war was ending. The city that had birthed Enigma's first defeat was now little more than ruins. In London, Alan Turing watched as German messages dwindled to silence. In his final report to the War Office, he wrote a line that has since passed quietly into legend. "It is no exaggeration to say that we owe our ability to fight this war to the work of the Poles who came before us." Their legacy was invisible. A war won not with guns, but with intellect, logic, and courage. The Enigma's fall had shortened the conflict by an estimated 2 to 3 years, saving millions of lives. And so, the spy who stole Hitler's war machine plans wasn't a single man in a trench coat or a daring infiltrator behind enemy lines. He was a mathematician in a modest office in Warsaw, one who looked at an impossible machine and quietly said, "We can break it." In that moment, the course of history changed. Because sometimes the sharpest weapon in war is not a sword or a bomb, but a pencil, a mind, and the will to see the pattern no one else can.